Good afternoon, everyone. We are live today, and I don't know whether I am more nervous about this particular topic than I have been about any other one that we've done to date. Our guest today is Joseph McGuire. And Joseph, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Is it Mien Shiang?
I'm told it's Mien Shiang, but
Mien Shiang.
I did say that to a Chinese friend here in Dublin, and she looked at me blankly. So it's somewhere in the ballpark.
It's somewhere. Face mapping and what our face says about our personality and about us. And that is what I've been picking up from my reading on it. Tell us about it and what it's used for and how you ended up doing this, because it's so unusual.
Okay. Yeah, it's a 3,000-year-old tradition. The documentation goes back that far. The understanding is that our faces, our static facial features, reveal a huge amount of information about our personality, behavior style, communication patterns, both in terms of how we receive and process information, and then how we externalize it, how we progress through a project, whether that be in our personal or professional lives, whether we work well in a team or otherwise, stress triggers and responses, health patterns, family influences, emotional history, and more besides. So it covers a lot. And I've been working with it for the past 35 years at this point.
And how would you use it? Like how? Yeah, I'm trying to say, how does something like that work into? Why would somebody need it? Why would somebody call you to use it?
Okay, I work in a number of different areas. Typically, I could be called to sit in on interviews for senior level positions. I could be called to sit in on negotiations to help read what people across the table are really thinking, what their real behavior style is, how people need to be communicated with to get agreements across the table or to get the best out of them, like in a team, because I work with teams as well, because Oscar Wilde famously said that Britain and the United States are two countries divided by a common language. So technically, the fact that we're technically speaking the same language doesn't mean we're actually speaking the same language in terms of how we process and think, etc. So I can help identify somebody's thinking style. Again, as I say, how they process information, whether somebody's more creative, whether they work in a more abstract way, somebody who needs like information in bullet points, somebody who needs the whole volume of the information, people who are more controlling, people who are more person-centered. All of that is visible in your facial features without you doing or saying anything.
So it's kind of like reading behind the words and what the person is saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we can create a fog with our words. There's we've all come across people who are incredibly articulate. We'll see it in politicians and a lot of celebrities, etc., where literally they create a fog with words which mean absolutely nothing. And increasingly in public life, what we're seeing is almost like Alice in Wonderland use of language.
Yeah, because isn't it within the first 3 to 6 seconds or something like that, somebody, there's a first impression is made. And a lot of that time, it's actually even by the fact that somebody says, "Hi, how are you?" And you can kind of go, there's something, either the voice doesn't sit with the demeanor or the expression that they're giving, but you can feel uncomfortable nearly within that. So is that where you would pick up on what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been doing this a long time, so there's a number of aspects to that. Number one, body language is called body language for a number of reasons. It's not just what people are projecting, it's what we're also picking up in our bodies when we meet somebody. And so many people are out of tune with that. Like we know we have 3 brains. We have the brain up here, we have the heart brain, and we have the gut brain. And while we're being made aware of it through neuroscience, etc., most people are not aware of it. And most people, in my experience, and I worked for many years as a therapist as well, are not tuned into what their body is picking up or how their body is responding. So if we're reasonably in tune, reasonably relaxed, our bodies will tell us a lot about what's actually going on for the person or the people we meet. Research from Harvard tells us that somewhere between 2 and 7 seconds, we're forming distinct impressions of somebody. And that basically refers to either like or dislike, friend or foe. But then we need to be able to go beyond that and pick up on a lot more detail. And again, it's not just in the words people are saying, because the words can mesmerize us or confuse us. But there's so much behind the words that we really need to be tuning into to get real connection with people.
So the visual cues that your face gives off, like they should match what it is that somebody is saying. Even just not even the visual, the whole physical cue should actually balance with what it is you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of misinformation around the area of body language. There was a famous study done by Albert Mehrabian in UCLA back in 1970, which has been replicated several times. And what people have picked up on it, erroneously, unfortunately, is the idea of 55% of our communication is in body language. 38% is in tone and syntax, and only 7% is in the words. And that has been, unfortunately, very much misinterpreted. It was a study that was specific to an area, but it really refers to the alignment of language, tone, syntax, and body, facial gestures, etc. So it's whether those areas are congruent tells us whether the person is really being genuine with their message. And again, we pick up on a lot of that with our body, with our bodies, our bodies are our antennae, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, and in one of your articles that you have on your website, I was reading that you would work sometimes with, I'll just take example, a senior executive, but you would work with him on how he would be, or she would be perceived by the people they're actually going to speak with. So absolutely. You would go through all that with them.
Absolutely. And there's one particular one caveat, I guess, in that situation. For me, I need to be assured that the person is working with integrity, that they're not looking to simply manipulate people, because if that's the case, and I will pick up on that pretty quickly, I will not work with somebody.
Yeah. And what sales teams then as well? Would you work with sales teams?
Yes, I do work, and I'm not teaching people how to sell. That's not my background. What I am showing them is how to communicate and how to get your message across in the way that the person you're speaking to or the people you're speaking to need to receive it. Because again, it comes down to how we process information. Like some people are much more linear in thinking. So and you can recognize that again. Like, for example, one obvious way one quick way to recognize that is whether people's eyebrows are straight across.
Now, you see, I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm half thinking I should have a mask going in front of me or something like this so you can't see anything.
Well, that's the thing. Even in today's world, where so many people are wearing masks, the whole upper half of the face, and particularly the eyes, are still revealing so much information anyway. That even in that scenario, we can still pick up on a lot of the non-verbal stuff from people.
Yeah. Now, is it that you have a map, or was there a map of the face done all those years ago then? Yes. And you would use that. How does that work? So what sections work for, what part, if you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, Sorry. Absolutely. You can break it down into very detailed parts, but in very simple terms. You can think in the terms of the top third, like from the hairline, for those who have one. Obviously, mine disappeared some time ago. So the hairline down to the eyebrows would be that whole forehead area would be, you could refer to that as the thinking area. The midsection then from the eyebrows to the tip of the nose would be the feeling area. And then from the tip of the nose to the chin would be the doing. So you're looking at which of those areas is greater, and that would be the primary strength. And then you're looking at shapes and angles, etc., to be much more precise beyond that. But you can also then look at divide the face into two vertical halves. So the right side of the person's own face is their public persona. The left side is their private persona. So again, you're looking for congruency or lack of between the personal and the private, the public and the private rather. Yeah. So there's all sorts of areas you can break it down into, and then you can relate it to different organs, which in the Chinese system, each organ relates to different areas of our emotions and our mental processes. So there's a huge amount of detail that it can be broken down into, and you can almost look at any given area of the face and still tell a lot about the individual.
And actually, Chinese medicine is fascinating. And over the last couple of years, It's something I got to know a bit more about when, even as you're mentioning, you know, the different areas of the body and how they're all connected. Like I would have first come across that with an acupuncturist I worked with, and she was like, she's amazing. She's brilliant at what she does, and her knowledge of how everything connects and whatnot. And then even the other day when we were chatting about reflexology and all, you know, all the different points and the connections, and again, Chinese medicine, and that's where this is all part of as well, and kind of falls into that area. Like they had such a way of tapping in to the body, you know, into humans, into life, into how things affect us and that, and how everything is connected.
Absolutely. And you have to remember that they didn't have any of the technology we have nowadays. So they had to use their senses, and they had to use the senses in a way that was very, very effective and could be demonstrated to be effective. And that's why these traditions have lasted so long and are continue to be used. And so much of it, like so much of what I'm doing now is very much based on, or is focused on helping people cultivate exceptional relationships, both in their personal and professional lives, because communication is such an essential tool. And it's an area where so many people have been falling down. It's an area where so many people have been really challenged since lockdown, because again, in their personal and their professional lives, where they're either removed from people physically or having to spend a lot more time with people physically, learning to communicate effectively and really understand who it is you're dealing with, it has become increasingly important. And it's causing the fact that people don't have those skills is causing huge amounts of communication breakdown, stress, and in many cases, unfortunately, even domestic violence.
Yeah, and really, I suppose that is the nub of it, because you are communicating, or at least trying to communicate. And I suppose I was just thinking there, and you mentioned families and that we kind of will put on a face. You know, inside we're saying one thing, but outside we're kind of saying, no, I'm fine. We'll put on the face, and I'll say, and that's where they're not marrying.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That lack of congruency. And again, unfortunately, I mean, you can really go into this at an incredibly deep level. Unfortunately, very few of us had any kind of preparation or training growing up to really cultivate emotional intelligence, self-awareness, harmony within self, so that we bring that into relationships. Like a lot of the time, unfortunately, we're effectively pinballing. Like we feel like we're being bounced around by life circumstances. So cultivating an awareness of self, what our real strengths are, what our deepest qualities, deepest values are, is increasingly essential to allow us to really develop and nurture strong, and my term, exceptional relationships, again, in all areas of life.
Yeah, and I would have come up with that, say, with clients in coaching. And as you mentioned it there, like the value system, you know, what is it that is really important to you? What is it that makes you tick, I suppose, you know, for use of a better term. But so if you're in with someone now, as I say, I'm sitting here going, oh my, wondering, you know, because you were talking about the forehead and the midsection of the, and I'm trying to look up myself at the screen, going, yeah, that's kind of big, you know, that's. But when you first meet someone, or you're working with an executive, you were saying, actually, sorry, it was in one of the pieces where you would sit in on maybe interviews.
Yeah.
In senior, how does that work? Because I'm sure now, unfortunately, after today, if anybody sees you sitting in a room, they'll go, "Oh no!"
Well, typically, I'm introduced as a colleague or an associate, and I make it very, very clear when somebody takes on my service that I do not advise do or don't take, or do or don't promote this person. What I will do is I will observe in the interview. I may or may not ask questions. Typically, if I'm asking questions, it's to alert the interviewer or the panel to some red flags. But I will, regardless of that, I will write up a profile at the end of the interview based on what I've seen. And I will say, if you employ the person, these are the qualities they're going to bring to it. this is their personality style, this is how they're likely to behave, this is how they're likely to respond under stress. These are the sort of things that will cause them stress. And if there are any red flags, even in terms of health, I will often be able to pick up on them and point them out. And it's not that I'm not a doctor. I'm very clear about that, but it can be very relevant in terms of the role that the company makes sure the person has a full medical checkup.
It's it's a fascinating science, and it is like a science. It's a technique,
Yep.
but to think that it's 3,000 years old, was it three? Yeah,
Yes.
3,000 years old, and it has been used all that time. So, what are the successes from it that you have come across?
Clarify what you mean by successes.
Well, what have you seen? Say they're interviewing someone, say, gosh, we don't know, but then they get a profile and they go, oh my God, so it's just that this person isn't good sitting in an interview, but actually they have all these qualities. Mm-hmm. Is that something that would happen?
Well, typically people are, there's three possibilities really with interviews. People are either very well trained and very well prepped to do interviews, and they've had their CVs doctored, etc. And some cases they're very overconfident. Some people are just get on with it, and then some people are very nervous. They'll spill their coffee and all that sort of stuff. You have to just ignore that, because some people can be incredibly nervous and yet be absolutely superb for the role. So I discount that kind of stuff. I'm looking behind that. Typically, like thus far, I'm not saying I'm always going to get it right, but typically I haven't come across a situation where anybody's come back to me and said you got it wrong. And I have come across situations where people have taken on people where I pointed out a number of things, and then they've come back to me a few months down the road and said, we had to let them go. And then when we looked at the profile, we realized you'd pointed out exactly where it was likely to go wrong.
So where do you start? You're sitting back there. So where do you start? Is it like, you start on the face, or do you start on a gesture, or do you start with how they sit or how they move, or what would your starting point be? Or is it in something they say or the way they say it?
Mm-hmm. For me, it starts with the face. It depends. It depends on how much movement I see, like as they're coming into the room or before they come into the room. Generally speaking, if I'm part of the interview team, I will be there first, so I will get to see them coming into the room. I will get to shake hands, and the handshake is revealing. Their movement, their posture, whether even their breathing patterns will tell me a lot. Then it's the face, and it's the static facial features as well as micro expressions, and whether the words appear to be congruent with their body language or not. Their posture, whether they're leaning forward, leaning back, all those things will contribute to the picture. But for me, the central thing is very much the face itself.
And you deliver training in this as well for businesses and that. And I suppose for training agencies as well, that you can go out and say, okay, this is actually a process. This is how you can do it. And would the trainings be very popular, Joseph?
The trainings are increasingly popular, yes. Obviously, there has been an adjustment in more recent times to the virtual world, which is very different. Yeah. Because you know this yourself, being in a room face to face with people, typically what I would be doing there, I would be using the people in the room, including myself, as the raw material. Because in going in there, it's one thing to show images on the screen, again, whether that's real or live or virtual. But when you can go into a room where you don't know anybody, and you can then talk about them, and in a very constructive way, obviously you're not putting anybody on the spot, but when you can go in and talk about them and demonstrate about aspects of how they need to be communicated with, and how they communicate externally and how they think, then it makes it much more real for the people in the room, and then it's much easier for them to take it on board and take it out into the world and use it for connecting with clients and prospective clients, customers, etc. So there is a big difference, as you know, between virtual training.
Yeah. And especially, I suppose, because one of the first things when somebody walks into a room, once they open the door, is their posture. you know, it's very hard to do that down the lens of a camera on Zoom, you know, because that would be, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Would something like that come into your training, you know, because I mean, posture has an awful lot to do with it. I mean, I was, okay, I was a dancer for years, but then I trained in classical music. So posture was always a huge thing when I was growing up, you know. And I remember Daddy, God rest him, I remember walking down the street one day with my late father. I was only young, and he just puts his arm straight across like that. In other words, you know, straighten up. Yeah, straighten up. If you hold yourself tall and whatever. Now, I know we're talking about space but surely as you stand tall, your face lifts, so therefore your expression lifts. So all of that, it's all connected.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And as you say, in the context of virtual, where you're only seeing this, that there's a lot of information being, as it were, withheld or hidden. So one has to adjust to what's actually visible on the screen. But again, even if somebody were wearing a mask on the screen, their eyes and the top half of the face will reveal a lot to me. But that's because I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah. Now you have a beard. So I'm just wondering then, if you are working with someone and they say have the full beard, does that interfere?
It makes it interesting, yeah. And there can be many reasons why somebody can have a beard. But I will not just be looking at the beard. I'll be looking at what particularly the eyes tell me, because the eyes are, whether you think in terms of the eyes being the windows to the soul.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. But the eyes reveal so much about the emotional history of the individual, and whether they're in a good place in their life or not, and whether whether they have been in a good place. Because the eyes actually, there's many, when you look at the eyes in depth, there's many layers there in terms of their emotional history going right back. So the eyes really will tell you whether the beard is there to hide something, or whether it's an expression of masculinity, or whether it's just simply a fashion statement based on something superficial. There's all sorts of potential things there.
Yeah, you see, I'm still very nervous. I think this is probably the most nervous I've been. And I don't know even whether I should, for the sake of it, say, right, well, what do you see here now that's facing you on camera? Because I don't know. I mean, I was reading the notes last night, and I'm looking in the mirror going, am I, you know, what have I got? What have I not got? But what would my forehead say then, apart from the creases?
Well, you see, all the lines are very interesting, and the lines also tell a lot about the personal history, and whether the lines are broken or unbroken. Some people don't have any lines. I've got quite a collection. So you know, that's there's a Japanese phrase. Oh gosh, I should one of those things I should know off the top of my head, but it's something not quite battle scars, but life.
I could actually put
marks of life experience, and the lines all relate to particular aspects of life. They're not just random. So if we have lines, ideally they'll be deep, which tells us that we've actually dealt with whatever the lessons are that the lines relate to. But your forehead, from what I can see here, is fairly vertical. So it tells me that analysis is actually very important to you, and facts are important.
I'm looking at Esther. You see, I can see Esther in the background here, down there, and she's going, yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Your face shape is kind of a mixture of oval and rectangular. Like we recognize 8 different face shapes, basically. So the oval tells me that diplomacy is very important to you, and harmony in your environment is very, very important. But the rectangular dimension tells me that you can step up into the role of leadership. But your leadership style is to lead in a way that's harmonious first. You prefer harmony, but if you have to step up and tell people this is what needs to happen, you're well capable of doing it, but it's not your first preference.
No, it's not. And Esther is, I know other people can't see her. I can see her here at the bottom of the screen, and she is there going, that is it, exactly, because she knows me so well.
Yeah,
absolutely. How are we doing on comments, Esther? And is there anything coming? I think Esther won't come on camera now, I think, because she'd be absolutely terrified. But, you know, there was so much in this. I hope I did what you do justice, because Joseph, I honestly didn't know where to start with it. It's such a fascinating area, you know, and there was so much reading on it, even from your own articles that you have on your website, which is, as people can see there, clearsightcommunications.com, and they can get in touch with you that way. Yeah, Martina, and it was Martina that I was chatting to the other day on reflexology. Yeah, absolutely brilliant, so interesting. And I know she's going on to do further training within the reflexology field, and it's on the face and face mapping and all that kind of thing too. So I knew, but there was so much in it, and I found myself looking at people and pictures going, I wonder. I'd say it's pretty addictive. Is like, can you ever switch off? Like, or is it every time you see someone you're going, uh-oh? Do you know what I mean? Do you switch off?
We're all instinctively doing it anyway, whether we realize it or not. But when I studied in London many years ago, I was studying like 4 nights a week and weekends as well. But I was also working with one of my teachers in his health food store. So as soon as somebody would come in, he would ask, okay, what's his condition? What's her condition? Because I learned it as a diagnostic tool initially. And it reached a point where I was walking down Kingsland High Street in London one day, and it was like I saw these waves, psychedelic waves of illness coming towards me. It was the most extreme experience I've ever had. And I had friends who had told me about taking acid trips, which I never did. And it was like I was having an acid trip without actually experiencing acid. So I don't know exactly what I did, but I did learn to switch off from having that experience because it was so extreme. So yes, I'm doing it, but I'm not so much consciously doing it now unless I'm asked to do it.
Yeah.
And I do have friends who are, let's say, looking for relationships, and they will ask me, what do you think of him? What do you think of her as a prospective partner? So there's a lot of that going on. And there's a lot of that work coming in now. So I guess it's harder to switch off because I'm asked so much, you know, but it's not addictive, but it's to me, this is playtime actually. Yeah.
Julie's post there. Actually, Julie is a guest soon on the show, and she got her face red in the past, and my kids, amazingly accurate and brilliant insights into how communicate with them better. Go, Joseph. Yeah, and I think, you know, even just from now, we've only spoken twice on screen, and once being today, and once being a few weeks ago when we were lining up the interview. But you know, Esther was in the background there, and you read mine, and she's going, that's her to a T. But so with families, I know we spoke just say about business and corporate and sales and that. Would you work with families and couples? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, because there will be barriers there now, particularly after COVID. Barriers have built up probably, and frustrations.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a lot of the work that's actually come in since COVID. I had a lot of live work lined up, which kind of got shoved somewhere down the road. But that's a lot of the work that's been coming in since lockdown, because people are having to spend time with loved ones, people they've been in long-term relationships with, or housemates, where suddenly realizing, oh, I'm not sure I actually know this person, or I'm not sure I actually like this person in many cases. So how do I communicate with them? Because we all have, like, we all tend to see the world through our own prism.
Yeah.
You know, we don't see the world as it is. We see, you know, as we are. We don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. So we have our own perspective on things, and on life, on people, etc. And we tend to think the way we think, and we often unconsciously assume other people think the same way, which is unfortunately not the case. So learning to recognize that Johnny or Mary or whoever, this is how they receive information, this is how they process it. And in many cases, this is their emotional history as well. So that's going to color their perspective. And if there's any stress, it can be exacerbated by me or you or whoever communicating in our particular accustomed style. So how do we temper it? How do we adapt it so that we can actually find that bridge to at least have some degree of harmony or some greater degree of harmony or cohesion, or hopefully really open
Yeah,
up the
and do you know
doors.
what funny in you saying that and for what you do, that actually links back to an interview we had a couple of weeks ago with Anne-Marie Ferris, and we were talking about children and education and how they receive, how the differences in kids, as we all know, of receiving information and processing it and all that, and the communication there within family and school and everything.
Yep.
And it's the same again now as what you do. And like communication is, I don't know whether we've lost the art of it or the skill of it or whatever as the years have gone by, but I don't remember it ever being as big an issue as it seems to have become over the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure you're familiar with the invisible gorilla. You know that study done by the two psychologists back in 1999, Chabris and Simons, where
No.
they set up a basketball game, and they had two teams, one with white tops, one in black tops, and they had two control groups. And one group was to count the number of times the team in white tops passed the ball, and the other group had to count the number of times the team in black tops passed the ball. And in the middle of the game, a guy dressed in a gorilla suit came on the court, beat his chest several times, and walked off again. Excuse me. And at the end of the game, 46% of the total control group were totally unaware that anybody in a gorilla suit had walked on the court. And that study has been replicated numerous times. But they coined the term inattentional blindness, because we see what we expect to see, and that's partly how sight works and how our brain works anyway. So by and large, we're seeing constantly what we expect to see rather than necessarily what's there. So unless we actually train our mind to be really observant, we're missing out on so much information. And again, increasingly in today's world, where people are spending their time glued to their phones or their devices, and looking down rather than looking up, and being bombarded with so much information anyway, we're not attuned to either our inner processes or other people. So it's not surprising that we're seeing so much miscommunication, frustration,
Yeah.
and stress in relationships of all sorts.
No, I know, I completely agree, especially with the phone and the tech and all that. Absolutely. Joseph, thank you so much for coming on today. We have your website address is there, Clearsight Communications. I think it's, there we go. Thank you, Esther, clearsightcommunications.com. And anybody, they can get in touch with you either for business or family. So they can chat with you there. Aileen, yeah, this is so interesting. I would say you might have a lot of communications now, because it's a fascinating topic. And the thing, and it's not invasive, and it's reading the face so people can be comfortable in their space. And because you can do it online, that part as well, they're in their own space. So they even have that comfort around them again. They don't have to leave anywhere,
Yeah, and when I'm dealing with individuals, it's very much about helping them identify their strengths. We have a thing in Ireland where we're looking for what's wrong with us,
the weaknesses,
and that's not where I'm coming from, because it's really about helping people identify what are the greatest strengths you bring to the situation and work from there. Yeah,
no, that's brilliant. Absolutely. And for anybody as well watching, we have our the 29th of July. We have our mini summit, our very first mini summit on workplace wellness. And the link is there, and we will post it in the comments as well. It's free. It's only for an hour or so, 7 o'clock in the evening. If anybody would like to come on board, grab a seat, ticket in your own home, a cup of tea, you can join in. And Joseph, thank you so much for coming on today. We'll chat to you now shortly when we're off air. And to everybody that joined in, thank you so much. And out in Twitter land too. We hope you enjoyed this afternoon, and I shall see you all again next week. Cheerio.
Thank you, Barbara.